Welcome to Public Health Matters, the show that addresses public health issues that matter the most to the citizens of Harford County. Real issues, real people, and the information you need to know.
Hello, I'm Rania Nassar, Public Information Officer for the Harford County Health Department, and your host for today's Public Health Matters, the show that takes a closer look at the public health issues that matter the most to the citizens of Harford County. Today's topic for Public Health Matters is autism. We will be discussing early signs of autism, as well as the resources available in Harford County. Joining us today is Sarah Sinclair, Supervisor of Student Support Services at Harford County Public Schools, and Shannon Hawley, Special Education Coordinator at Harford County Public Schools. Welcome to our show, and thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great. So let's just take a moment to kind of have you all introduce yourselves and what your connection to the topic of autism is. So, Sarah?
So I am the supervisor for school psychologists for the school system, but I'm also a school psychologist by trade. So a lot of my work has been in supporting students with disabilities, including students with autism, and that goes from making an initial identification to supporting them throughout their school. But I also have various people in my family with autism. I have cousins, brothers, and also I'm a parent to a child with autism. So it's very close to home for me.
Great. Shannon?
Well, my initial connection to autism is the 18 years as a special educator with Harford County Public Schools. Many of the students I provided services for have autism, and my later connection is being the proud mom of a son with autism. And currently I'm still with the school system in a different capacity, coordinator of secondary special ed programs. So I interface with more policy and things that affect students with autism.
Two amazing moms and educators with me today, so this is absolutely amazing. So let's get into some of these questions about autism. So if we can take a moment, just kind of explaining to our viewers today, what is autism spectrum disorder, and why is it an important topic to kind of discuss today?
Sure. So autism spectrum disorder is a medical diagnosis. It's a neurodevelopmental condition, which means it is present, developing within the brain, in utero, and then present throughout childhood and across the lifespan. And it results in just brain differences that usually what we're using to identify it are the behaviors and patterns that people with autism demonstrate. The two big ones are differences in social communication, so that could be speaking, but also non-speaking communication like gestures or understanding the communications of facial expressions. And then also some restricted, repetitive, or rigid behavior. So that could be things like being rigid for changes in routine, or being overly interested in certain topics, or having some repetitive behaviors that can be soothing.
It's funny to me because thinking about my son's diagnosis, which didn't occur until he was 12, and not in the school setting, but in the medical setting. So level 1 autism through Kennedy Krieger was his way to be diagnosed, but with my background, seeing a lot of the repetitive behaviors or him greeting individuals, he was very hyper-focused on cars when he was little. So he would, as opposed to saying someone's name, he'd greet them by the make and model of their car. And people just thought it was a really fun, quirk, and I did too. He was kind of a savant in that way, but those were markers that I kind of picked up on as time progressed, and eventually an autism diagnosis at 12.
Any other early signs of autism too as well?
So it really just depends on the child. You can see so many different early signs because every child with autism is different. There is just a range of language in kids with autism, from kids who are non-speaking to kids who have just prolific vocabularies. And there's a range in all of the behaviors associated with it. There are many different characteristics within the condition of autism, and most kids or adults with autism, most people with autism are demonstrating a range within those characteristics. So it really depends on the person that you're speaking about. Generally, there are some screening tools that pick up on some of them, but not all of the early signs of autism.
And then, are there signs that are frequently missed too with the diagnosis?
Sure. So the signs that are often picked up on are those missed milestones, missed developmental milestones. So speaking, communicating with eye contact, things like following directions, things like that. But the ones that are often missed are for those kids that are meeting their developmental milestones. Those kids might have other labels placed on them, like they're anxious or shy when they're not engaging socially, or when they have a reaction to a change in routine. And then sometimes they're labeled as hyperactive when they're running around and moving a lot. So those are some characteristics that can be easy to miss, but they can also be common for other conditions or just for child development, because routine is really important for every child. So if a child struggles when their routine is changed, to some extent that's expected. It's just the intensity of the struggle that really makes it different.
That's so true. My son was diagnosed with other health impairment due to ADHD. So that really resonated with me when you said it can often be identified as ADHD or hyperactive behavior. One of the nuances to his development was he never read phonetically. So he was more, I guess, what you would describe as hyperlexic. So he would just read billboards. And I would say, oh, we went from sounds to just immediately reading billboards as we drove by. So that was, again, another marker, but one of those things I didn't see as frequently with students that I had with autism at that time. But over the years, I've actually seen it a lot more. So
my daughter is the same. So she knew all of her letters at an extremely young age, and is now she's now 7, and she is reading chapter books and whatnot without ever being instructed on how to read the words that she's reading. So yeah.
How about early intervention? So why is early intervention so critical for a child's brain development?
So early intervention for any child with any disability is really important. It helps. There are so many different skills that children just naturally pick up on. Their brains are like little sponges. They just learn things just by being around them, by existing. But with autism, those differences in social communication and the differences related to restricted or repetitive behaviors, those are the areas where they're not absorbing in a way that a child, typically developing child, would just automatically absorb. What do how you react to a social interaction. When somebody smiles at me, I smile back. They just naturally do that. Early intervention can help kids with autism to understand those things that they're not picking up on directly. Maybe not necessarily telling them they need to be different or look like a typical child, but helping them understand what's expected socially so that they don't get frustrated.
That reminds me of a board game that I played with my son we still play it, he's 16 now. But it essentially gives you different scenarios, social situations, and you have to make that expression. And I didn't realize until we played the game how he thought he was making an expression, but he actually wasn't, in fact. And so it really gave us an opportunity to open the door of conversation about, do you think you made that face? Or are you not sure? And it was a more safe setting. One of the other things that he participated in was Mount Washington has an autism social group that he did virtually during COVID. But it was a great way for him to not only, he kind of felt like a strong social person with social skills because he was with similar peers to himself. So they really trusted in him. They called him the sports expert, which I thought was really funny because I was like, I don't think he knows that much about sports. So he kind of surprised himself with being like the resident sports expert. But it gave him low stakes, a low stakes environment that he could really feel comfortable in and thrive on some of those skills the psychologists who run it were providing him in direct instructions. That was really cool.
And another reason why early intervention is important is not only does it accelerate students learning those skills, but it also helps educators to understand what a child needs so that when they enter school, the supports are already in place rather than it being a trial and error situation when they're in the classroom. That's the last thing we want. It's frustrating for kids. It's frustrating for families.
Yes.
And it's also, you know, that's not the goal of educators is to be in that situation and watching kids struggle.
And it's so funny because I think about music therapy, which was one of those very early interventions that I did with my son, and it was initially to really encourage his language, and it turned into she realized he sings in perfect pitch and he picks up music really well. So now he's a singer and a piano player. So it's like it honestly helped him find like his niche area of strength, just kind of as a byproduct of getting an intervention that really helped him communicate.
That's really sweet. I love that.
I do too.
So how about like later signs? So what are some later signs of autism that parents and caregivers can look out for? So like older.
I will say the rigidity with emotional dysregulation is what I saw the most in adolescence. I call it like the autism adolescence clash with my son, is where things were scheduled of like music therapy. I remember a time where every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, it's etched in my brain, he would sometimes have a difficult time going. Like maybe something happened before that, you know, I didn't know about or he wasn't communicating, but there was this dysregulation that occurred and it was very mild at like 7. As he turned 12 or 13, it's like, whoa, this same issue, but different behaviors showed up. So he became much more vocal about his disagreement with or whatever we were doing or what changed in the schedule that would have not been as difficult before became more difficult. So a lot of the times it was for me seeing similarities in his development. Hey, we've seen this behavior before, even if it was an outburst when he was younger or a meltdown, it sometimes came with a lot more vocal, his voice is changing and it may sound a little more aggressive, but it was a very similar pattern. So honestly, just being open to not always labeling something immediately, but really picking up on what are the attributes, what are the behaviors I'm observing, and then reporting that to others. ABA therapy became very helpful for him as a teenager, which I would not have thought. I would have thought it was something we would have done earlier. But the rigidity and the way that he presented later, that actually became, it was morphed and they really developed it for him. And I love the treatment plan that comes through ABA therapy because it was really tailored to his adolescence and his growth. But those signs, it's just observe the patterns, note what you see, not make a judgment about it. That was very helpful for me.
I've also heard a lot of families say for their teens or tweens that their child is holding it together during the day. You don't see it at school what we see at home. And then when they get home, they let it all out. They're very anxious. They're very frustrated. They may lock themselves in the room or the bathroom or something like that, cry, etc., be withdrawn from their family. And that is often we're seeing that with girls, but boys too. And that is a result of something called masking, where they are covering up their characteristics because they understand what, to some extent, socially what I should look like. So that I'm trying to fit in and look like everybody else at school, but it's taking a lot of mental and emotional effort to do that. And when I get home, I'm exhausted. And it's kind of similar to like a toddler having a meltdown when they're exhausted at the end of the day, except it's a teenager having a meltdown because they're exhausted for a completely different reason. That if you are not also neurodiverse, if you're a neurotypical parent, it may be hard to understand why are they so frustrated at the end of the day. But it really is that effort and that energy that it takes to cover up who you really are all day long and not meet your own needs all day long.
And I feel like that's one of the important things about getting a diagnosis is it can explain part of who you are. I call us neurospicy in my house because I have ADHD and my son has autism and ADHD. But I think knowing who he is, when we first got the diagnosis, the first thing he said to me was, I don't think I have autism. And I said, okay. Weeks later, driving, you know that autism thing, Mom? I think I have that. So it was one of the, I was initially like a little nervous thinking, oh no, like, is he not identifying with, you know, this diagnosis? But as time went on and he observed and he started to see, he was like, oh yeah, I see it here. So I feel like it helps him identify part of who he is, and the neurospiciness just adds to the fun in the family.
Love that.
I see the same thing with my daughter. She embraces who she is. We haven't hid it from her, diagnosis from her. We've shared it with her and what it means. She's very curious about it, wants to learn more. And she's also really interested in other kids with autism and really, she really connects with them and bonds with them. And I think it's it's cute and it's a beautiful thing to see them supporting each other and just really embracing who they are as individuals and what they have in common.
100%.
So if a parent does suspect that their child may be autistic or has maybe some of the characteristics that you both have mentioned today, what would be a really good first step for a parent at that point?
I think the first step is to share with the pediatrician. Pediatricians have access to a lot of screening tools. Now, I will say the screening tools are really great for those children who are not meeting developmental milestones, but they may also miss students or children who are. So children who are speaking, children who are learning, children who are able to copy or recite social expectations even if they struggle to engage in them. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. But sharing with the pediatrician is a great first step. They can use those screening tools, but you can also explain, you know, why you think there are characteristics there if the screening tool doesn't pick up on that. And then from there, the pediatrician may recommend an outside referral for an evaluation. Evaluation really should be done by someone who specializes in autism. There are some developmental pediatricians who do specialize in autism, but I wouldn't say a general pediatrician does. And referrals can be made medically, so you can seek out the medical diagnosis of autism. And that can be done through a variety of clinics like Kennedy Krieger, Mount Washington, but also some private practitioners like private psychologists. And then you can also make a referral if you believe your child requires specialized instruction to the local school system. So Harford County Public Schools from birth through graduation is able to evaluate, and that is a little bit different than a medical evaluation. It's looking for an educational disability, which is defined a little bit differently, but it is a good way to access that specialized instruction if you believe that's something your child needs.
And that was one of the cool things. My son has both a medical history. He was hospitalized his first 13 months, so he kind of had some microscopes on him for other reasons. But one of the things that the hospital connected us to after discharge was Child Find and the early intervention. So not only speech classes for me, but speech, OT, PT, all the things that he needed through an IFSP was available at our home initially, and then we transitioned to an IEP in the school system. So it was super helpful for him to have early intervention resources and access. Although we didn't see autism at that time, his developmental disability did lend itself to those same therapies and resources as a student.
And I also made a referral to my local Child Find through my local school system for my daughter when she was 4, and through that she was able to access preschool services. So she was able to enter pre-K with a special educator, and I really think it's made such a huge difference for her, and it's helping her thrive, understand who she is. But when she entered kindergarten, they already knew what she needed and had supports in place for her.
That's great.
Yeah.
What is the difference between autism disorder and Asperger's syndrome?
So There used to be separate diagnoses. It used to be that if Asperger's was reserved for people with above average IQ or intelligence. When the diagnostic criteria was changed for autism spectrum disorder, it began to encompass Asperger's. So when you look at old diagnostic manuals, Asperger's is in there. It's no longer in there. And now it's autism spectrum disorder, which includes people of any intelligence level.
Okay.
And it's really just looking at intelligence aside, although that's an important factor in how to support people. It's looking at the specific criteria that are just those autism features. So what used to be Asperger's, if somebody has that diagnosis now, it would just fall under autism spectrum disorder.
That's a really great explanation, because I'm sure it's still confusing to individuals. What I mean, years ago saying one thing and now there's new things. So hopefully that also helps too with like decreasing the stigmatization of autism too in the community.
Yes.
So I think this education about that topic is really important. How about treatments for autism? Are there any treatments for autism?
So
Anything?
autism doesn't have a cure. Like, it's because it's a neurodevelopmental condition, it's lifelong. However, there are different types of therapies and supports that can be put in place to help with people's ability to advocate for themselves, learn functional life skills, and just really become a happy and thriving individual. So those range from things like speech therapy, if that is an area of need, to behavioral therapy, ABA therapy, but also just different types of like mental health therapies, because there's a lot of comorbid like depression or anxiety that can occur for people with autism. And then some instruction if it's in a school setting, some people with autism may need instruction or accommodations and supports.
And I feel like one of the major things we talked about, the difference, you can get a medical diagnosis and or a school-based educational disability or diagnosis. There are also habilitative services that are available through your private insurance. So my son, I know for sure, and some levels, not having, I think a lot of the masking that you talked about was present for him. So a lot of the things didn't present as readily, I guess, when he was assessed in the school setting. But outside of the school setting, they were still manifesting and occurring pretty regularly. So he did private speech and private OT and paid for by my insurance. So that's one of the required statements we have to read at individualized education plan meetings, is informing parents that it's not only the school setting that you can receive services, it's also outside of that. And those were game changers for my son.
We also used, we had family behavior therapy for my daughter. Even though I'm a psychologist, it's different when you're working with somebody else's child versus
Very
your
much
own.
so, yeah.
And it's different, you know, I'm a school psychologist, so when I'm trying to support my child at home, it's a different set of skills and techniques and whatnot. So we were able to access family therapy, which was really helpful, because it wasn't just somebody talking to my child, my at the time 6-year-old, about her feelings and her behaviors. We were discussing it as a family and what we could put in place for just a smooth, happy, functional family life, and that also made a world of difference. And then we were able to carry over some of those techniques into the school setting by communicating our successes with the school. So that was great, and that's something that is available with the medical diagnosis through the insurance.
That's great.
Yeah.
I kind of want to quickly go into the cause of autism. Do we know what causes autism? Is it genetic?
The best research that we have, now I'm not a medical researcher in terms of the cause, but I'm more working with identification and supports. But the best research that I've seen is that the best known cause is a genetic link. So often we're seeing autism running in families. And often there are some genetic disorders or syndromes that have a strong link to autism as well. So that might not run in the family, but it's genetically based and it's linked to autism. But there's a lot of research that shows that if you have family members with autism, you're more likely to have more people in your family with autism.
And I feel like in my family, overall, autism, in the research I've done in my doctoral program, there's not a high incidence in the past for Blacks to be identified with autism. And so for me, I don't have that family history of a diagnosis, but I feel like once my son was diagnosed, I started to look at like older family members and I was like, I see trends here. So although I don't have that, like, I guess on paper diagnosis, there are attributes that are quite similar, so I can see kind of that genetic component.
And it's interesting you say that because there are a lot of people right now, adults, whose children are getting diagnosed with autism. And as they're hearing the criteria, they're reflecting and they're saying, I do that too. That sounds like me. And we're seeing a lot of mothers, adult women, getting diagnosed with autism right now as a result of their children getting diagnosed. So it's lifelong. It's always been there. They just didn't have the language or the word, the label to understand who they were all along. So we're seeing that as well. That's an interesting trend that's happening.
Great. And before we close out today, I just want to ask, what can family and friends do to support their loved ones with special needs?
I would say have an open mind, and when it comes to diagnosis, leave that to the experts in your life, but make note of observations. Try hard not to make judgments on what those observations are, but those lists of observations, even if they come from onlookers, would be extremely helpful in the diagnosis process, I feel.
And then I would say that if there is a diagnosis of somebody in your life with autism, just keeping in mind that success for them isn't for that to look like it no longer is there. It's not the masking. It's for them to be happy and as independent as they can be.
Great.
Love that.
Thank you, ladies, so much. This was a great conversation. And that's all the time we have for today. I would love to thank my guests on today's show, Sarah and Shannon. If you'd like more information on autism spectrum disorder, please refer to the resources page after the show. And join us next time for another important health issue that matters the most to the citizens of Harford County. Thank you so much for watching.
You've been watching Public Health Matters, brought to you by HarfordTV. Watch what matters.